Today, we're diving into one of the most surprising and dramatic geopolitical twists in Europe, Denmark's shocking move that has completely shifted the balance of power in the Baltic Sea, leaving Russia stunned and scrambling to respond. What's happening in this region right now isn't just a local issue, it's reshaping the entire strategic map of Northern Europe and could have long-term consequences for NATO, the European Union, and global security. The Baltic Sea has always been a critical zone of tension between Russia and Western powers. It connects Russia's key naval base in Kaliningrad and the port of St. Petersburg to the Atlantic through a narrow passage known as the Danish Straits. These straits, the Øresund, the Great Belt, and the Little Belt, are entirely controlled by Denmark. This gives Denmark immense leverage over who can move ships, especially warships, through this area. For decades, this control has been mostly symbolic. But now, it has become the centerpiece of a new power struggle between Copenhagen and Moscow. Recently, Denmark made a bold and unexpected decision that's been described as a game changer for European security. It has significantly tightened its control over access to the Baltic Sea and taken steps to restrict Russian naval movements. This decision didn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of years of tension, espionage incidents, and military provocations in the region. But the timing and firmness of Denmark's move shocked even its closest allies, let alone Russia. Denmark's action came amid growing concerns about Russian naval activity near its waters. Over the past few years, there have been multiple incidents involving Russian ships and submarines operating close to Danish and Swedish territories. Western intelligence agencies believe Moscow has been testing the defenses of NATO members, mapping undersea cables, and probing vulnerabilities in the region's critical infrastructure. The sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines in 2022, which still remains officially unsolved, intensified these concerns dramatically. In response, Denmark began taking its maritime defense more seriously than ever before. It ramped up naval patrols, increased cooperation with neighboring countries like Sweden and Finland, and started modernizing its coastal surveillance systems. But the real turning point came when Copenhagen announced new maritime restrictions, requiring prior approval for certain Russian vessels and tightening control of navigation routes through its straits. This effectively means that Russia can no longer freely move its navy between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea without Danish permission, a blow to Moscow's strategic freedom. For Russia, this is not just an inconvenience, it's a major strategic loss. The Baltic Sea is home to Russia's Baltic Fleet, based in Kaliningrad, one of the most militarized regions in Europe. The fleet's ability to project power, transport supplies, and maintain naval operations depends on access to international waters through Denmark's straits. If Denmark chooses to restrict or monitor that movement, Russia's naval mobility becomes severely limited. It's as if Denmark has its hand on Russia's only maritime exit gate to the west. Moscow immediately condemned Denmark's decision, calling it a provocation and a violation of maritime rights. Russian officials accused Copenhagen of acting under pressure from NATO and the United States, claiming it was part of a broader Western plan to isolate Russia from the European seas. Russian state media framed it as another example of small countries being used as tools by the West against Moscow. However, Denmark stood firm, saying it was merely ensuring its national security and enforcing international maritime law. Behind Denmark's calm diplomatic tone lies a powerful strategic reality. NATO's control over the Baltic region is now almost total. With Finland and Sweden both joining NATO, Russia's Baltic Fleet is surrounded on all sides by alliance members. The Baltic Sea, once seen as a contested space, has now effectively become a NATO lake. Denmark's move simply sealed that transformation. It sent a message: the Baltic is no longer a safe or open corridor for Russian power projection. What makes this shift even more significant is Denmark's growing role as a regional leader in maritime defense. Traditionally, Denmark wasn't seen as a military heavyweight. It's a small country with limited population and defense budget compared to major NATO players like the US, Germany, or the UK, but geography is destiny, and Denmark's location gives it enormous strategic importance. Whoever controls the Danish straits controls access to the Baltic, and right now, that power firmly belongs to Denmark and NATO. This move also highlights a broader trend. Small but strategically positioned nations are becoming key players in Europe's security framework. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and the Baltic states are no longer just peripheral members of NATO. They're at the front lines of deterrence against Russia, and the alliance is investing heavily in strengthening them with joint exercises, new bases, and advanced weapons systems. Denmark's navy has undergone a quiet but significant transformation in the past decade. Once focused mainly on coastal defense, it now operates advanced frigates, surveillance aircraft, and cyber defense units capable of coordinating with NATO forces across the North Atlantic. The country also plays a critical role in protecting undersea infrastructure, something that's become a major security concern after the Nord Stream sabotage. These cables and pipelines carry not just energy, but also internet and communication links vital for Europe's economy. At the same time, Denmark's decision to act decisively against Russia's naval ambitions is deeply political. It sends a signal that even smaller NATO countries are ready to confront Moscow directly, and it reflects a growing impatience in Europe with Russian provocations. After years of hybrid attacks, cyber operations, and aggressive posturing, the Baltic nations are saying enough is enough. Denmark's move symbolizes a turning point, a shift from cautious diplomacy to firm deterrence. But Russia is not likely to take this quietly. Experts warn that Moscow could retaliate in several ways through cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, or increased military activity near the Danish borders. There have already been reports of Russian electronic warfare attempts to jam navigation signals in the Baltic. Some analysts fear that Russia might even test Denmark's resolve by sending its ships close to the restricted zones, forcing Copenhagen into a direct confrontation. This situation has also raised questions about the balance of power in Europe. For years, the Baltic region was seen as a potential flashpoint, but Denmark's move might have tilted that balance decisively in NATO's favor. By closing off Russia's easy access to the Atlantic, it effectively limits Moscow's influence and forces it to rely more on its Arctic routes, which are harder to operate in and more expensive to maintain. Interestingly, this isn't just about military control. There are massive economic implications too. The Baltic Sea is one of the busiest maritime trade routes in the world. Billions of dollars worth of goods pass through it every year. Denmark's control means it can ensure safe navigation for Allied trade while keeping a close watch on potentially hostile vessels. It's a combination of security and economic strategy, protecting both borders and commerce. Some European analysts have even called Denmark's decision a mini-blockade. Though that term might be too strong, it's not an outright ban on Russian ships, but it does impose stricter rules, surveillance, and transparency. Every Russian move in the Baltic is now being watched more closely than ever. That constant monitoring adds pressure on Moscow's military planners, who must now assume that every deployment or maneuver could be tracked or intercepted. For Denmark, this also marks a new era of self-confidence. It's stepping out of the shadow of larger European powers and asserting its own strategic voice. This isn't the Denmark of the 1990s, quiet, neutral, and focused mainly on trade. This is a Denmark that understands its geopolitical importance and is ready to use it to safeguard Europe's stability. At the same time, Copenhagen has been working closely with Washington and London. NATO's naval command structure heavily relies on coordination through the Danish straits, and U.S. warships regularly pass through these waters during exercises. American officials have publicly praised Denmark's leadership in defending the Baltic region, calling it a pillar of Northern European security. This cooperation has made Denmark more influential than ever within NATO's inner circle. Of course, all of this puts Denmark in a delicate position. It's asserting control over a vital maritime choke point, but that also makes it a prime target for Russian retaliation, not necessarily military, but hybrid. Russia could use disinformation to stir domestic debate in Denmark, trying to paint the government's actions as reckless or dangerous. It could attempt to exploit divisions within the EU or even target Denmark's energy infrastructure through covert means. The Danish authorities are well aware of these risks and have been strengthening their resilience in response. The larger message here is clear. The era of complacency in the Baltic Sea is over. Europe has realized that geography matters again. Control over narrow waterways, straits, and islands can decide the outcome of entire strategic contests. Just as the Dardanelles or the Suez once defined global trade and power, the Danish Straits now define the balance between Russia and NATO in Northern Europe. Many observers see Denmark's boldness as a reflection of a wider European awakening. After decades of relying on U.S. protection, European countries are now taking more initiative in defending their region. The war in Ukraine has fundamentally changed their mindset. There's no longer room for hesitation or half measures. Denmark's move is not just about controlling a strait, it's about sending a signal of unity and resolve. For Russia, this represents yet another strategic setback. Already isolated economically and diplomatically, it's now facing military containment in one of its most vital maritime zones. The Kremlin might try to downplay the importance of the Danish Straits publicly, but behind closed doors, this development will be seen as a serious blow to its regional ambitions. The loss of freedom in the Baltic Sea limits its ability to threaten NATO countries like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and that could change the dynamics of the entire northern front. Meanwhile, Denmark continues to strengthen ties with its neighbors. The Nordic region is now one of the most integrated security networks in the world. Joint exercises, shared intelligence, and coordinated naval patrols have turned the Baltic Sea into a fortress of democratic cooperation. The symbolism of this unity cannot be overstated. Small, peaceful nations working together to deter a much larger and more aggressive power. This new balance of power also has a psychological dimension. For decades, Russia projected strength in the Baltic flying warplanes near NATO borders, conducting intimidating drills and boasting about its missile capabilities in Kaliningrad. But today, that narrative is shifting. The initiative now lies with NATO. Russia is the one reacting, not leading. And Denmark's decisive action played a crucial role in creating that shift. In essence, this moment marks a historical transformation from a Baltic Sea that once balanced between East and West to one that is firmly under Western control. Denmark didn't just shock Russia, it reminded the world that strategic geography, when combined with political will, can change everything. As tensions continue to evolve, the world will be watching how Russia responds. Will it escalate militarily, or will it adapt to the new reality? And will Denmark's move inspire other small nations to take bolder steps in defending international order? These are the questions shaping Europe's future. One thing is certain, the Baltic Sea will never be the same again. What started as a quiet tightening of maritime rules has turned into a geopolitical earthquake. Denmark's decision proved that even a small country, when standing on principle and supported by allies, can reshape an entire region's security landscape. And that's what makes this story so remarkable. Denmark, often overlooked in global politics, has now become the gatekeeper of the Baltic, the small nation that stood firm and altered the course of Russian power in Northern Europe. It's a story of courage, strategy, and timing, and it's far from over. So, what happens next will depend on how far both sides are willing to go. Will Denmark continue to push the boundaries of its control, or will it face pressure to ease tensions? And how will NATO manage this new reality, balancing deterrence with diplomacy? For now, Denmark's message is loud and clear. The Baltic Sea belongs to peace, not provocation. Thanks for watching, and if you found this analysis interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the world's most critical geopolitical developments. The Baltic story is just one example of how quickly power can shift, and how small nations can make a big impact on the global stage.